went home, and so Steve and Linda aren't going to be here today. She wanted to text me just to let me know I'm going to miss today because I'm helping Steve. But Linda's the one who plays the flute and the saxophone on Sunday mornings. And Steve, her husband, they've been going here for a long time, and they went to Mexico with us on mission and everything, but he's really sick. Cancer's terminal. He's on hospice, those kinds of things. So she just wanted people to know that's why they weren't here today. So, but she said before you go live, so she didn't want me talking about it on Facebook. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that to you before we. Her husband's very sick. Yes, he has cancer from the scans. My understanding is that it's pretty progressive and throughout, and not something he could recover from. And so he went on hospice maybe a month ago. So yeah. Anyway, well, I hope you guys are well today. Samuel, did you go through a ceremony too? Did you graduate Thursday? Friday. Samuel graduated from Southwestern on Friday. Congratulations. Yeah, awesome. That's great. Congratulations. Yeah. So what's next? OPT. What is OPT? Oh, okay. Internship type or something like that, basically. A on-the-job continuation of your education. Got it. Okay. You have a spot? Okay. All right. I'm praying for that. Yeah. So, and then after that, return home kind of thing? Yeah. I got it. Okay. So more studies then, basically. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Very good. Well, congratulations on graduating. That's really cool. Yeah. So it's the weird thing about graduating in December is that people usually don't think much of it because, May is when everybody's kind of focused on graduation. Both times I graduated from Southwestern, I graduated in December. And I did so without anyone there, too. I told my wife, I said, don't come to the graduation. Don't come. I said, I'm only going because they wouldn't give me my degree unless I went. They wouldn't give it to me. They threatened me. They basically said, no, you have to show up. I'm like, really? I have to show up? So, yeah. Anyway. Well, it's good to see you this morning. It's cold and wet. Cold and wet out there. The rule of church attendance is that if it's raining, the attendance will be down. But what I've found is that this depends on how many days before that it had been raining. If it's been raining Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like you just get like a string of bad weather days, Sunday attendance actually be fairly normal because they're so sick of the rain, they just want to get out. But if it rains, starting Saturday afternoon, or it hadn't rained at all until Sunday, people will get up and go, oh, it's raining out. They've been out the day before already, then they'll bail on Sunday. So my experience has been how much the rain affects you will be how long has it been raining. And if it was a nice day the day before and it's raining, it will kill your attendance because they're just like, I'm not fighting through that rain. But if they've been stuck inside for 2 days because of the rain already, they're like, let's go to church. We got to get out of this place. So anyway, hope you're well. Kim and I, we didn't do anything yesterday, really. So you went to Round Rock? That's a little bit of a drive. Oh, that's a little bit of a drive. And holiday travel, down and back same day. What is that, 3 hours? Yeah. Maybe less than that for me, but Waxahachie's a little closer to Round Rock than Grand Prairie. But yeah. Oh, very good. Saw the grandkids. All right. Round Rock. That used to be a country area when I was a kid. Out in the country, Round Rock and Georgetown. Now it's one big city. It's just part of Austin. When I was a kid, though, if you went to Round Rock, you're going out to the country. So Yeah. Anyway, all right. Are you guys traveling for Christmas? We're not. We're staying here. Where are you going? Austin. You guys traveling? No. You got most of your family's local, right? You guys traveling? No. Traveling? You're working? Okay. All right. Well, thanks for working. Yeah. I mean that someone's got to do it. I'm probably going to be up here with the homeless for a lot of it. Kim's got to work the days after Christmas, so the clinic's open. So, Mildred, you guys traveling any to Christmas? You staying local mostly? You guys are local too, staying here? Yeah. All right. Well, if you're real bored and you're local and you want to come and help some with the homeless being here, you're welcome to do so. How many days did we do last year? We did probably 4, and that's probably how many we'll have. We'll have 5 days, but 4 nights this year. The nights are harder. Days are not as bad. Nights are a little bit harder because we have it's just more challenging. We have people stay overnight here and stuff like that. I wouldn't challenge you. You spent the night one of the nights, did you? I'm going to probably stay Christmas night. I think Christmas Eve. I got a student in my class at DBU who said, "Oh, I'll stay a night or two." He's a former Marine who's done a couple of tours of duty in Iraq. I figure he can probably handle himself overnight. But anyway, he said, "Oh, I'd love to help with something like that." I'm like, "All right, that's cool. I'd trust him with just about any situation." So I think, no, it's not hard. Really, they have people from the homeless organization that will stay in the education building with the homeless that are staying here. We need one person over here so that we have a church representative to deal with any emergency. And one night, 2 years ago, the police came by at 2 a.m. because they had a guy who was taking the bus from New Mexico to Atlanta, and he booked 2 separate bus tickets, thinking that the Grand Prairie bus stop would be the bus stop to get him to Atlanta, and he could just stay in the terminal. Well, Grand Prairie, they drop you off at the curb. Yeah. And so it was 20 degrees that night, and they found this guy, and the police department had heard we'd opened this homeless thing. So at 2 a.m, they knocked on the door, and so the guy spent the night here, and the next morning, 7 a.m., one of our people drove him to the bus station in downtown Dallas. And so having someone here that night who was like, "Oh, the police are knocking on the door," went and opened the door, heard the story, went, "Okay, we'll get him a place to stay for tonight, get him some food," and then the next day drove him there. And the family, he had a bus ticket in his hand. He just was confused about just wasn't familiar with the bus stations in Dallas-Fort Worth, and wound up stranded at Grand Prairie. But they found him out there at the curb. He's like, "Well, I'm waiting all night," and he wasn't even going to be in the spot where the bus was coming. So it's like, this is not going to work. So having someone overnight, it's helpful. If someone gets sick, or we have a homeless person who the weather does really get to them, and they're to know where things are, to know who to call if you get in a bind. So it's good to have a person spend the night as our representative too while we're here. But anyway, yeah. It's a cool ministry, and like I said, she does some job training. The last couple of times she's done resume stuff. She's done some job training in some other areas, and they'll spend an hour or 2 a day doing some job training, which is really cool. They usually help prepare the meals as well, so she's really good about engaging and helping them out. And her goal is to get them into permanent housing. There's been a lot of them that have been here in years past that are now in permanent housing. She got them some work, some subsidized housing, and they were able to kind of keep that going. She checks back in with them. She's done great with them.
What was the lady that was in charge of them?
Tammy.
Uh-huh. Tammy came to me and showed me a picture. And she said, "I don't know what these round things are." And I looked at her and I started laughing. She just looked at me. What they were is I'd given this old guy some pipe that the guy that owned the land that they're on down there by Luke 12 and Old Lady.
Yeah.
I give him the 84-inch pipe, and these people are living in them.
They made them into homes.
Yeah,
Old Hanson pipes, and they turned them into homes. Hanson never thought making pipes would be also a residential plan, but
and I told her what were
concrete pipes, I assume. Yeah.
84-inch.
Wow.
24-foot long. And she said,
84. You could stand up in it then.
"Oh yeah."
Yeah. Okay.
And she said,
Like you made
I
them.
looked at them and I said, I'd give those to look at.
Yeah,
Cool.
Bill was the plant manager for Hanson Pipes up on I-30. And so apparently also you were the maker of makeshift homeless shelters. So good.
Obviously,
Yeah. All right.
I didn't know it till the time.
Until then, that's funny. All right. Well, we've been working through the book of Micah. So today we're gonna read Micah chapter 1 and start focusing on verses 8 through 16. All right. So Micah 1, we're gonna read the whole chapter this time. The word of the Lord, which came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. Hear, O peoples, all of you. Listen, O earth, and all it contains, and let the Lord God be a witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. For behold, the Lord is coming forth from his place. He will come down and tread on the high places of the earth. And mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will be split like wax before the fire, like water poured down a steep place. All of this is for the rebellion of Jacob and for the sins of the house of Israel. What is the rebellion of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? Just a quick note. The word Jacob is used throughout the book of Micah. I think it occurs 5 times. I'll have to go back and look again. But all 5 times it appears that it's interchangeable with the word Judah. Normally, we think of Jacob and the children of Jacob or the 12 tribes, but it appears as though Micah uses the word Jacob distinctive of that use, but instead referring primarily to the nation of the two southern tribes, the nation of Judah. So, so the word Jacob, the reference to the patriarch Jacob, apparently, Micah is using this to refer to the 2 southern tribes, so the tribes of Judah.
Could he be doing that because the southern kingdom was not just Judah but also Benjamin? Could he be using Jacob to?
True, because if he says Judah, that's a single tribe, even though the nation was referred to as Judah. The 2 tribes together were referred to as Judah. Maybe that is it. Maybe the term Jacob is a little more inclusive. Judah seems a little bit exclusive of the tribe of Benjamin in that. Yeah, that's good. So what is the rebellion of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? So if that's the case, he's talking about Samaria being the influence on the 2 southern tribes, which we talked about last time. What is the high places of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem? There maybe does mean tribal specific, right? The tribe of Judah and Jerusalem being the capital of that tribe, of that area. He says this, for I will make Samaria a heap of ruins in the open country, planting places for a vineyard. I will pour her stones down into the valley and will lay bare her foundations. All of her idols will be smashed. All of her earnings will be burned with fire, and all of her images I will make desolate. For she collected them from a harlot's earnings, and to the earnings of a harlot they will return. So that's the first 7 verses. We covered that last week, all right? So that sets us up here. He says, verse 8, in light of all that, what is the response? He says, because of this, now the first thing he talks about is himself. He's talking about his response to this. Is that the sin of Judah or the sin of Jacob is Samaria. Samaria is being destroyed. That influence has now come on Judah. He's worried about that same judgment coming to Judah, the southern tribes. He says, because of all this, I must lament and wail. I must go barefoot and naked. And so here's this idea of mourning, public mourning, probably covered in ash and dust, that kind of thing, maybe even wearing burlap sack as kind of this sign of public shame and repentance and mourning. Remember that Jeremiah also does some similar things. He has his own very demonstrative weeping or wailing in the book of Lamentations, things like that. And so here we have Micah saying, because of all this, I must lament. And so he says, I must lament. And he says, I've never heard jackals or ostriches mourn, but apparently the cry of the jackal and the cry of the ostrich must be pretty dramatic. The commentary noted it. I'm unfazed by it. This would be more like, for us, this is pretty disconnecting, and just that we don't hang around jackals or ostriches very much. Though I do have an empty ostrich egg at the house. Do you know at the Fort Worth Zoo, we have the chief financial person for the Fort Worth Zoo is a member of our church. And at the Fort Worth Zoo, they don't want the ostriches hatching these eggs. So they drill a hole, drain them, and put them back in the nest because they get upset if the egg's gone. And so they have them sit on an empty egg, and then finally they take it out of there, you know. So it's just funny. So I have an ostrich egg that someone drilled a hole in and drained, and that they'd put back in the, Angela said, here, I'll give you an ostrich, which is hilarious. So we have an ostrich egg at the house. I don't know why. Kim brought it home. I was like, okay. But anyway, I know what an ostrich egg looks like, at least an empty one, but I've never heard one mourn. I don't know what the mourning of an ostrich would sound like. But anyway, or that of the jackals. But the mourning and lament of the jackals or the ostrich. And it says this, for her wound is incurable, for it has come to Judah. It has reached the gates of my people, even to Jerusalem. So he's lamenting, he's crying, and it's because the destruction of Samaria is now starting to come to Jerusalem. All right? And so what he's going to do now is he's going to take his own personal mourning over this, and he's going to encourage other people to join in. He's now going to invite a community mourning. This is a time for everyone else to join in. That's why he says, tell it not to Gath, weep not at all. At Beth El Ephraim, roll yourselves in dust. So Gath is a Philistine area, but these other cities. So he's going to name a bunch of cities. I'm going to mispronounce a bunch of them. These are little villages in the Shephelah, the rolling hills from Jerusalem down to the Mediterranean Sea. There are these areas that are part Judah and part old Philistine communities, that whole region. And the reason he's mentioning this is that Micah is from Moresheth, which is one of those cities along that region of those rolling hills known as the Shephelah, the place where shepherds would take their sheep for grazing. And these little cities through there, Gath, Moresheth, these places where people like Samson from his area, he's from this region. David was from this region. Remember, David hung out with his mighty men not far from here. In fact, there's a cave not far from some of these locations where David held up with his mighty men, and they hid out. Remember that? Not far from here is where David slayed Goliath. So this area is a Benjamin, Judah stronghold, very, very important area, and it is mainly a place of shepherds. And there's a few cities in this area, and he calls on them to roll in dust. Go on your way, inhabitants of Shephir, in shameful nakedness. So again, just kind of the weeping and mourning. The inhabitants of Zanan does not escape. The lamentation of Beth Azil, he will take from you its support. For the inhabitants of Morath becomes weak, waiting for good, because a calamity has come down from the Lord to the very gate of Jerusalem itself. Harness the chariot to the team of horses, O inhabitant of Lachish. She was the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, because in you were found the rebellious acts of Israel. So Lachish, the city of Lachish, this is a walled, it's a smaller community, but it's a walled, heavily armed, walled city. And according to Micah, and where Micah's from, Moresheth, he could see Lachish city lights at night from Moresheth. These are very close to each other. This is like Mansfield and Grand Prairie, only without the suburban sprawl. They would have been a few miles apart from each other. And they were both built up on hills, and at night you could see the city lights. This is how you navigated yourself in ancient times. It's the city lights. You could pitch your tent at night, right, where you would aim your tent at the city lights of Lachish, if that's where you were headed. And you would pitch your tent in such a way that your tent, the next day when you couldn't see the city lights, you could get behind the tent and go, that's the direction we need to go. And you would start heading that way, right? And so It says here, harness the chariot to the team of horses, O inhabitant of Lachish. She was the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion. What is the daughter of Zion a reference to? Probably the inhabitants of Jerusalem, right? Zion, the holy mountain, in reference to Jerusalem. So apparently, Lachish was one of the places where imitation of the sins of the northern kingdom started to show up. Lachish was the place where this started to show up. And then because of that, because of Lachish's role in this, we find this, therefore you will give parting gifts on behalf of Moresheth Gath. Moresheth Gath is a city or region. The houses of Achzib will become deception to the kings of Israel. Moreover, I will bring on you the one who takes possession. O inhabitant of Marashah, the glory of Israel will enter Adullam. Adullam is another city in that area or community in this area that gets destroyed. And then make yourself bald and cut off your hair because of the children of your delight. Extend your baldness like the eagle, for they will go forth. They will go from you into exile. All right, so we have this lamentation, and we have Micah. He has information about coming judgment that's going to hit, and we're told why the judgment is coming. And the names of all these little cities are all in the Shephelah region that are to the west of Jerusalem. So if you can imagine Jerusalem, and then you've got about a 15 to 20 mile stretch from Jerusalem down to the Mediterranean Sea. And you can imagine this, Jerusalem sits at about 3,000 feet above sea level. If you go down to Lachish, it's about 1,500 feet above sea level. So it moves pretty rapidly down to sea level at the Mediterranean Sea. And so if you can imagine these little bitty villages to larger cities like Lachish that go from Jerusalem all the way down to the Mediterranean Sea, many of these are being named here. Some of them are old Philistine areas. Some of these are Philistine areas that the Jewish people defeated and took over. In fact, Moresheth is one of those areas that was under Philistine control when the Jews first got there and took over. It's the area where our prophet Micah is from. He's from Moresheth. And he gets this vision, and he gets the vision at the same time Isaiah gets his vision. And the visions now, if you lay them side by side, have some pretty similar markings. But the one thing that's distinctive is that a lot of Micah's prophetic material has to do with these little villages in the remote shepherding communities in the Shephelah. Whereas Isaiah's primary focus is where he's from, Anatol, the suburb of Jerusalem. This is the area where Isaiah focuses his primary prophecy, but they're prophesying about the same events at the same time. In fact, some of the language is identical between the two books, which means I think Micah got some language verbatim from Isaiah and put it in his book. All right, so that's the context to all this. All right, so now looking at some of the specifics. Any questions about any of that? All right, so this is, we have the introduction here. God is coming. We get this language that's, he's going to melt the mountains like wax before him. So we get this strong image. You say, what will that look like? And then we get the specifics. He's going to bring judgment on these communities because they're imitating the sins of Samaria or the northern kingdom. And then after all that is disclosed, Micah then enters into a time of personal mourning, but also a call to these Jewish villages and cities to join in this time of mourning because judgment is coming upon them. All right. Any comments or questions for some detailed discussion here? No? All right. Now, so just a quick reminder of the history here. So 1000 BC, you have King David, and it's going well-ish. Solomon comes along and continues the it's going well-ish. I had a student so Old Testament, I make them write a paper, 2-page paper, and I had a student presented on the wisdom of Solomon. That was her presentation. She wrote a 2 or 3 page paper on the wisdom of Solomon, which is fine. It was totally great topic. But I have the right to ask the students questions when they're done making their presentation. So I said, what do you think about Solomon being the wisest person on the planet, and yet within a couple of decades we have 1,000 women and idolatry has now become part of the nation of Israel? And so we talked through that a little bit. And the idea of the 1,000 women being primarily that Solomon is this sex-crazed guy, I don't think is accurate at all. I got to tell you, I think there's a bunch of them he never met. This had nothing to do with sexuality. This had to do with alliances with other kings. I think there's a lot of these women that he probably had very little contact with. The exchange was over alliances and trade and these kinds of things. I suspect he didn't know many of their names. Some of them I don't even know if he'd met very long, other than maybe a marriage. And the concubines, some of them he never met. I don't think this had anything to do with that. I think the foolishness on Solomon's part was that since he brought them from these foreign countries and they wanted to participate in the idolatrous worship of their homeland, he let them do it. And I think Solomon felt bad for them. They'd been pulled for their homelands. It was good for the nation. It made them wealthier. But the negative was these poor ladies had now, in a culture that wasn't their own, in a worship that wasn't their own, a language that wasn't their own, and Solomon, as a nod to make them feel more at home, agreed to some things I think he probably shouldn't have. Now, I'm not saying that Solomon didn't sleep with a lot of different women. I think he did. But I'm just saying there were so many women here, and this was so much driven around trade. There's some of these women that came in as concubines I don't think he ever even met. It was more about the trade. And from that, my student concluded that he may have taken the wisdom to the spot of, well, he was being fiscally wise for the nation because of all the benefit to the nation and to him personally. He let his wisdom be such a driving force that he left out the particular implications. But I think the understanding of biblical wisdom, though, gets clouded in that biblical wisdom is not wisdom like earthly wisdom. It's not like financially wise. It's not like Solomon's a great stock picker who had some bad moral choices. You can't take godly wisdom and separate it out like that. Is that godly wisdom is seeing things the way God sees them and doing them the way God sees to do them. Not because you had great financial outcome, even though your moral choices are really bad. And so I think for my student, it's kind of interesting because I think for her, this idea of wisdom had to do with, if you give him a problem, Solomon's going to make really good choices that give good outcomes. And she used the example of the two moms with the two kids. Remember that? And one of them rolls over on her kid, and Solomon has this solution, and it identifies who the true mother is, that kind of thing. But saying that, and then defending the 1,000 the women and wives and concubines as a means to greater financial success for the nation, meant that the understanding of biblical wisdom, I think, is lost there a little bit. And so, to me, Solomon's wisdom means he's actually more accountable for the decisions than he would have been otherwise. He should have known better, right? We would, I think, say he should have known better. To whom much is given, much is required, as Jesus says. He'd been given so much. He used his wisdom, in fact, and saw great returns from it. The building of the temple, some of the other aspects of that wisdom played out. But then within a couple of decades, a lot of that gets put to the side, and he ignores what wisdom tells him to do. So the reason I bring that up is that really is the beginning of some of this stuff. And that really does kind of bring into the nation of Judah and, well, at this point, the 12 tribes are one nation. Israel brings in this idea of the worship of other kingdoms. And so the very point of Joshua's inhabitation, taking over the land, the conquest of the land, was to drive all that idolatry out. And now you have Solomon systematically at the highest level, bringing it back into the kingdom. And so by the time Solomon dies and you have a split kingdom, we have a pretty strong permission now to the northern kingdom to do the religion of the people around you as best suits you. Jeroboam, Solomon's big opponent who'd been living in Egypt, immediately comes in and sets up idolatrous worship. And so 900 BC, we have the divided kingdom. By 800 BC, the northern kingdom is full out Baal and Asherah worship. And so 700 BC, the northern kingdom falls. 600 BC, the southern kingdom falls. 500 BC, they return. 400 BC, the city is rebuilt. And so I have these broken up in 100-year blocks. You see that? So 1000 BC, United Kingdom. 900 BC, divided kingdom. 800 BC, idolatry, and a pretty big separation between north and south, actually, right here. 700 BC, the northern kingdom falls. 600 BC, the southern kingdom falls. 500 BC, they return. 400 BC, we have a city rebuilt. 300 BC, last Old Testament prophet. 200 BC, Maccabean revolt, Hanukkah. 100 BC, the Roman dominance. And then 0 BC, the birth of Jesus. So I broke them into 100-year blocks. It doesn't exactly work because Maccabean revolt's really 167 BC. Things like that. But the Roman dominance is a little not exactly in 100 BC close. Yes?
You left something out. Since you have Maccabees before that, you have to have Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great, which should have been 300 BC. Yeah, he comes through with his army around 300 BC, destroys Tyre and Sidon, which I think is predicted in the book of Isaiah, and then comes to Jerusalem, and the people in Israel, they go, hey, we think you're cool. And he goes, I think you guys are okay too. And so he does the one thing with them he didn't do with anyone else. He does not destroy them. And so he goes, cool, we're friends. See ya. And off he goes. And so Jerusalem is spared. And there's a prophecy in Isaiah about the coming destruction of Tyre and Sidon, and describes it almost to the detail, where they can't get to the little island city. And so Alexander the Great takes stones and they throw them into the Mediterranean Sea until they can walk out and destroy them. It's described in the book of Isaiah. So pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, I did leave out poor Alexander. Yeah. Such a slight on my part. It's not my stomach. You hear that? Sounds like someone's drilling back there. It's not service yet. It's too early to snore. Oh, man. All right. Okay, so Micah, let me go back here. So Micah finds himself, this is after the northern kingdom embraces idolatry, about 700 BC. So in 700 BC, Sennacherib comes to Judah. Now, the northern kingdom falls in 722, but in 700 BC, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, comes to Judah. So Samaria has already fallen, and the northern kingdom's already fallen. He comes to Judah, and when he comes to Judah, he starts by attacking the cities in the Shephelah. And in fact, we have, if you go to the British Museum, there are these reliefs. That's Sennacherib sitting on his throne there. And that is Hezekiah paying tribute to Sennacherib. And Sennacherib tells us in his relief that he caged up Hezekiah in the city of Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. So I guess they had bird cages in Assyria 2,700 years ago. Sennacherib does fail to mention in these reliefs. And again, British Museum. You can go see them. It's pretty cool. He does not say that he lost his entire army. He comes back to Assyria, and out of the embarrassment of losing his entire army, someone assassinates him and replaces him. And do you know how he lost his entire army outside of Jerusalem? Remember the two lepers go out, they're about to starve to death, and like, we're going to starve anyway, we might as well go out. If the Assyrians run us through, we're going to die anyway. They get out there and they're all dead. Remember that? They're all dead. What happened to them? Yeah, so they were all dead, and Alexander the Great brought a historian with them, and Alexander the Great tells us that they had an outbreak of the plague, that rats got into the group and transmitted the plague, and they all got sick and died. Oh, well, in a couple of days, overnight. and they all got sick and died. Alexander the Great, historian, verifies this account of the death of Sennacherib's entire army that happened just a few hundred years before Alexander the Great got there. They were doing a history of it, and that's what he writes in his historical record. It said Sennacherib lost his entire army. He goes back to Assyria, and in embarrassment, he's assassinated. And we know the assassination from historical record from Assyria, but also from Alexander the Great's historian. So pretty interesting stuff. And so they get out there, and all these people are dead. All the Assyrian army's dead, and these two lepers, they start eating, this leftover food, and they go, I feel kind of bad because everyone's in Jerusalem. They don't know that the Assyrian army's all dead. We should probably go tell someone. And the two lepers go back and they tell the city of Jerusalem, hey, the army's all dead. No one's out there. No one alive is out there. They've all gone home. And Hezekiah's like, what, really? And so the Lord spared them. This assault actually had huge historical implications too in the city of Jerusalem, because you remember during this time period, Hezekiah, in order to save the city from siege, dug the famous tunnel to the pool of Siloam from the natural spring, the Gihon spring outside the city, and they met halfway and left an inscription on the wall in 700 BC that was recently discovered of how these two digging groups through this incredible rock granite face met each other. It was all during this time period. So, but the reason I bring them up is that one of the things that Sennacherib did was completely destroy Lachish. Lachish is the place that gets destroyed here. And so he brings up Lachish, Micah does here in his prophecy, and he says, O inhabitant of Lachish, she was the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, because in you was found the rebellious acts of Israel. So some have wondered here, is Micah's prediction a prediction of Sennacherib's destruction of Lachish in 700 BC, all right? 701 to be specific. So 701 BC, Sennacherib destroys Lachish. However, he mentions at the very end of this is that, for they will go from you into exile. Now that does not happen in 701 BC, but instead occurs in 605 BC, and then followed again by a second exile in 597 BC, followed by a third and final exile in 586 BC, all at the hands of the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar, right? So it's interesting that Lachish rebuilds after Sennacherib. They rebuild the city, re-inhabit it, and when Nebuchadnezzar comes, he takes the exact same military path that Sennacherib did 100 years prior. He goes through the Shephelah, destroys all those cities, including the city of Lachish. And I forgot to put pictures in of this, but I'll bring it next time. The Astorka, I think is how it's pronounced, but this is pot shards that someone uses as pieces of paper. Okay, so ancient times, you run out of paper, they would take broken pot shards and they would write notes on them. And archaeologists did not know this, but they're digging, and someone said, I think they're examining it, and they noticed when they put it under certain lights, like black lamps or whatever, the letters would pop off of there. And so they started doing this thing with pottery now, is they'll put it under certain lamps to make sure there's no writing on the pottery. But the most famous Astorka, I think that's how it's pronounced, Astorka, the most famous of this is the Lachish letters. There's a set of letters found from the attack of Nebuchadnezzar on Lachish, and it is an intriguing set of letters. The person writing on these broken pot shards is an assistant to the military head of Lachish, and they've been watching the lights of a town nearby, and one of the first things written on there is, we no longer see the lights of this other city. I want to say it's Moresheth. May have been Moresheth, but I don't remember. And then he's writing on there, no longer can see. And then the next letter says, we hear the sounds of the foot soldiers coming. Nebuchadnezzar's foot soldiers. And then the next letter is, the outer wall has been surrounded. And then the next letter is, the outer wall has been breached. And then the last letter is, they've now breached the inner wall. And that's the last thing the guy writes, assuming he gets killed right after this. And so they have these things called Lachish letters. So Lachish gets destroyed by Sennacherib in 701 BC. Lachish gets destroyed again at 600 BC, or 700 BC by Sennacherib, 600 BC by Nebuchadnezzar. And in both cases, we have historical preservations of this. We have the Assyrian record of the destruction of Lachish. Lachish is named in the Assyrian records from the destruction in 700 BC by Sennacherib. And then we have the Astorka, where the Nebuchadnezzar destruction of Lachish is written by hand. Archaeologists find this, and they're fascinated. They're like, this guy was keeping these notes, and he'd have paper, so he wrote it on this potsherds to kind of document what was taking place. And they found these about 25 years ago, put some black lamp on them and went, whoa, there's words on this, and then translated it. And so archaeology has discovered two significant finds on the destruction of Lachish that support Micah. And the question for us, and this is in the commentary that I've been reading through, is which destruction does Micah have in mind? That's one of the discussions here. And because either one of them might fit. And so in the midst of this, and the reason it's significant is that the destruction of Lachish also was the destruction of these other cities that he names here. And what I could not tell from the archaeological record is, do these cities get destroyed by Sennacherib and Nebuchadnezzar, or just Sennacherib, or just Nebuchadnezzar? That's what I could not tell. And the problem is, some of these places, they don't even know which tell site it is. Like they're not even sure in some of these cases. Some of these, in fact, I went out and read, this is how I can get distracted really quickly. Adullam, I went out and tried to read some about the archaeology of Adullam. And there's a debate about which dig site is it. Because these tells can be fairly close together, and trying to figure out which one's which is very, very difficult to do. And in fact, there's a bunch of these archaeological tells in Israel today that no one's touched. You know what I mean by tell, T-E-L, a tell site? This is where, it's a mound so in ancient times, when your city got destroyed, you didn't get a bulldozer and level it out. You just filled in the holes and built on top. And then when that one was destroyed, you didn't take a bulldozer, you just built on top. And so what happens is these tell sites, they do like this, like they get narrow, like a cake, like layered cakes. And archaeologists figured this out. So what they started doing, Kathleen Kenyon, archaeologist, started cutting these dig sites like squares and leaving a walkway between all the squares. So they'd cut like a 10 by 10 foot square with like a 1 or 2 foot walkway between. So when you would get down about 10 feet down in that hole, you could look at the layers of destruction. So pretty fascinating stuff. So I'm not sure. So Lachish, there's two different destruction layers, one from 700, one from 600. And they can find them both. They can find the destruction site. Lachish has actually been dug quite a bit. And that's how they found the Sorka and those kinds of things. But a lot of these other tell sites, they haven't dug them up yet. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. There is a tell site near here called Timnah. It's a former Philistine city that became a Jewish community. And the people who were in charge of the dig at Timnah was Southwestern Seminary in the 1970s and 80s. And so at Southwestern Seminary, they actually have a museum in their library on the dig at Timnah and its destruction level. And it dates from the time of Jeremiah, so it's a Babylonian destruction, 600 BC, and it would have been destroyed at the same time. It's not named in this list, but it's in the same neighborhood. Timnah is right near Moresheth, right near Gath. So, So I think probably Micah may have in mind here, the commentator kind of, I thought, punted on this one a little bit. He said, maybe he had both in mind. I'm like, oh, come on. But I think probably given the exile reference here, that he probably has in mind the definitive final destruction of Lachish at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. I think that's probably what he has in mind here. And Isaiah, remember that Isaiah in his writing also had the final destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. And given Micah and Isaiah's shared information, my suspicion is that this was within the prophetic material, an understanding of, remember, because of Hezekiah. Remember Hezekiah showed the Babylonians his stuff? And Hezekiah gets confronted by Isaiah, like, what'd you do? He goes, well, I was just showing, giving tours. Tourists were in town, took them to the theme park, took them to the water park, and then I took them to the temple to show them the gold. And Hezekiah's like super happy about it, remember? And Isaiah goes, you're a moron. And he tells him at that time, none of this stuff will be here because the Babylonians who you showed it to will come get all of it. And I think that does time out pretty well with the exile reference here in Micah. So I'm going to lean towards these destruction by Babylon. Lachish was never rebuilt. Timnah was never rebuilt. Moresheth was never rebuilt. Gath was never rebuilt. That Babylonian destruction was complete, final, devastating. And those tell sites are probably still sitting there today. Just mounds of dirt ready for someone to dig them up. These aren't big, by the way. When you say tell, you're thinking about a city. The city of Jericho that fell during the walking around it, 13 times. 6 plus 7. 13 times. The entire acreage of that tell site is 7 acres, which is smaller than Matthew Road Baptist Church's property here. The city of Jerusalem's inner wall at the time of Hezekiah, before he expanded to the greater wall, was only 30 acres. 30 acres, so 3 or 4 times the size of Matthew Roads. These are not huge pieces of land. So when these tell sites are destroyed by the Babylonians, when settlement comes back into the area, it's very different. And they're not doing like they were doing in ancient times of, let's just build on top of this mound. They start building Roman-type cities where they go, now let's build a city. And a little bit more Western in its approach and less build on someone else's garbage. It was more, let's just start over. So those tell sites are still sitting there. And so I think that's probably what the reference here is, the destruction that is going to ultimately come through the Babylonians because of the idolatry that has swept into the area. All right, so that's, and because of that, Micah says, I'm weeping, I'm mourning, and he says, and you should join me. Everyone should join me. The whole world should join me in weeping and mourning. These cities should join me because this is coming. Their trouble is coming. Extend your baldness like the eagle, for they will go forth from you into exile. And so I think that's the discussion here. Yeah. All right. Well, we're about out of time. We'll pick up with Micah chapter 2 next week. All right, let's pray. God, thank you for your mercy and grace. Lord, I pray that these warnings here in the book of Micah, just the general warning for all of us to remain faithful and true to you, that our hearts would be set on you. Protect us, Lord, the temptation to run to culture and run to the things that are shiny and new all around us, but that our hope, our faith would be firmly set on you. And we pray all these things